This is Cotton Stoops, and today's HTUC video is on Nymaurae. Nymaurae has been in a weird position for quite some time now, however it has stayed consistent for a long time and it's still a really good Lumion to use, so let's talk about it. The counters and checks and teammates that you'll have to know that will go with Nymaurae, the roles and sets that Nymaurae has, and of course the defensive coverage and typing that Nymaurae will have to have in order to actually stay relevant. Today's video is all about how to use and counter Nymaurae. So the role that Nymaurae plays is an essential question to ask, and the only reason we can answer it, or the only way, is the base stats. The base stats are really simple because its melee attack stat is the only bad stat it has, so don't use it. You also do have some good HP and melee defense, while it isn't as good as some other Lumions because it is lower than some offensive Lumions. It does have a good speed tier of 100, being able to outspeed all the walls and some wall breakers, not all, which makes Nymaurae perfectly in the middle. Not too fast, not too slow, it's definitely pretty good for what's going to be coming. And of course, the energy of 115 is really high, allowing you to use a lot of your moves in quick succession, so this is pretty good. 119 range attack, this is not on par with Valkyrie and Ikazune, but this is still really hard hitting, so don't think that this is a bad stat. And of course, its range defense of 122 allows its low HP to actually seem very high and allow Nymaurae to invest in other things that will help Nymaurae be a lot more better. So what role does Nymaurae play? It is a fast and decently strong. It's only range bulky, but it's also a fast and bulky pivot at the end because of the moves it has. I would definitely recommend using it as a pivot. I just don't think it's good offensively enough to separate itself from other contemporaries like Valkyrie. So yeah, with that out of the way, let's talk about Nymaurae's defensive typing, which will help it stay as a pivot. Nymaurae's defensive typing is light and air, and it has 5 resistances to light, fire, bug, ancient, and brawler. Light types like other Nymauraes, Luminamis, Flash and Flee Phage Knots, and Valkyries and Celestings are some good stuff to switch in if you do have the chance. Fire types, while not as common and not limited to, these are some of the fire types you can switch in. For example, you can switch in on Pyrolin, Chartiki, or Seer Knight, but do note that some of them do have offensive coverage that will hit you super effectively, except Chartiki and Pyrolin. And of course, you do have that bug resistance, which does help you out extremely against stuff like Harvesect, so that's pretty good. You do have an ancient weakness, which you can switch into Obsidian, which is pretty nice. And of course, that brawler resistance does help you against Barbadger and C.B.O. I did forget to put the spirit immunity here, so just to cover this quickly, you can only switch in on stuff like Harvesect because most of the spirit types in the game will hit you super effectively, which is not that good. And you only have 4 weaknesses to Dark, Ice, Electric, and Metal. Speaking of spirit types, a lot of these spirit types have dark type moves, such as Vesperatu and Ursul, which is pretty bad for Nymaurae, and as well as Revenine. Ice types like Barbadger, Wintrix, Tundrelin, and Himber will also be very threatening in your OU metagame. And of course, the Electric weakness is very detrimenting because you do have Lumions like Phage Knots, Metatoad, and Aeligwana and Zulong, who will definitely be able to take advantage of your electric weakness. And of course, your metal weakness is very detrimental as well because you do have stuff like Valkyrie, Stratosaur, Tyrex, Oxydrake, and almost every other metal type that can hit you super effectively. So with these in mind, just keep away from these dark, ice, electric, and metal types and switch in on the stuff you resist. Do note that you do have good enough bulk to actually take hits from these, so it's not the end of the world if you're matched up against one of these because you do hit dark types super effectively. So with that out of the way, let's talk about Nymaurae's defensive set. Nymaurae's defensive pivot set will have the ability Quick Recovery. You can run the offensive set, but particularly I do not think it's that worth running, and I'll be talking about it a bit later. Quick Recovery is so we can switch out of the battle and not have the status that we got burned or poisoned by, so this is pretty good. You also do have the personality of being robust or nimble, I'm pretty sure this set will be the robust variation, but nimble is also fine as well. And as for the moveset, Gamma Pulse, Air Blade, Perch, and Flash and Flee will be your main 4 moves. You can of course sub out Gamma Pulse for Gust if you really want to. You can of course, if you do want to run the offensive set, replace Perch or Flash and Flee with Peace of Mind so you can actually hit hard as well. But particularly because it's a pivot set and we're not staying in the battle as much, setting up is not that important. And for the items of choice, I do not think that Nymaurae is good with most of the traditional items, so running the Volt or Shade Pearl will definitely be good to help with your weaknesses. And as for the TPs, 200 HP is to max out our HP stat, 200 speed is to max out our speed stat, although if you do want to invest in some other speeds, you can of course do that as well. 64 energy is to get up to 300 energy, which will let us use 6 Gamma Pulses or 6 Flash and Fleas, which is pretty nice. And I'm pretty sure the 200 HP and the 32 melee defense is to tank a very brawny hit from Vesperatu, being boosted by a Sharp Claws and Dark Shell or Dark Essence. Do note that you can invest into more melee defense if you really want to. I actually recommend it, but because the 32 melee defense is the benchmark that you want to hit and not go under, this is what I'm putting. And as for the offensive set, just run 200 range attack and you're good. So with that out of the way, let's talk about Nymaurae's counters and checks as well as its teammates. Nymaurae's offensive counters and checks is very simple because most of the stuff in this metagame can hit it super effectively. Stuff like Himber is really good because of its ice weakness. I forgot to put Windtrix in here as well, but you can do that too. Metal types like Samrine is also really good, and electric types like Zulong, Halvantic, Phasionaut, and Ikazune, and electric type move users like Deldrix can be really good in revenge killing or possibly switching in. Of course, not Deldrix. And you do have Eclipse, which is really good for Nymaurae because while it isn't the most bulkiest, because of how low investment Nymauraes will usually have, Eclipse is going to be switching in a lot more better against most Nymauraes and block that pivoting ability. You also do have the defensive counters and checks, which will contain Pyrelin with the Fanning Flame, obviously, electric types like Phasionaut, Ileguana, and Metatoad. Do note that a smart 200 invested range attack Nymaurae does 3-hit KO not Pyrelin, but 3-hit KO Phasionaut with Gamma Pulse. This is safe enough, but if you really want to use a counter for Nymaurae, these guys are really good for it, except Phasionaut. Cetamars, Tyrex, and Stratosaur are just here for generic range bulking. And finally, for our defensive teammates, we have the general stuff that can, of course, synergize with Nymaurae because of how well Nymaurae covers these guys' weaknesses. Nymaurae is immune to the Earth type, which means Barblast and Pyrelin will get your weaknesses covered. Pyrelin is typically weak to air if it's not Fanning Flame, so Nymaurae does resist that as well. Viscarna does help Nymaurae with its weaknesses, and of course Tyrex is covering its electric weakness as well. You can of course run other defensive stuff. It's not that hard to find teammates for Nymaurae, so yeah. With that out of the way, let's talk about the conclusion and my thoughts on Nymaurae. So I've been debating with myself on whether or not defensive or offensive Nymaurae is worth running. I am not sure about this because there are some arguments that make Nymaurae a better offensive choice, but I think the way that Nymaurae is designed, it's probably better off as a fast defensive pivot. That doesn't mean you cannot use offensive, however, because while light and air is, in my opinion, a pretty bad offensive coverage duo, it definitely is fine for what it can do, and I do not really want to get into all the mechanics on why it might be better than defensive, but as of right now, defensive just seems so much better. It has quick recovery going for it, and incandescent only boosts light type moves. It also does have that speed tier factor, and like I said, we do not really have a lot of fast defensive pivots in the game other than Phasionaut. Nymaurae just seems to be a better defensive Lumion because of its typing. It's fast, it's defensive, it has pivot moves, and it's not really that competing in the damage spectrum anyways, so that's just my thoughts on it. If you want to like the video, then of course do that, because if you enjoyed it or if you found this video informational, do that. Subscribe if you want to see more of these kind of videos. I have made a whole playlist of all different kinds of Lumions that you can go check out on my channel. And of course, remember that Zulong is still a dumpster fire.